The engine roared as the green Lexus RX collided with the junkyard crusher. The sound of metal, crumpling under pressure, echoed across the property. Charlotte Beaumont's prized SUV was being reduced to scrap her power, her arrogance crushed in an instant. She thought she could bully my grandfather into selling his land. She was wrong. And as the machine's jaws clamped down, I could see the fear flicker in Charlotte's eyes. But the worst part, she had no idea what my grandfather had planned next. This was just the beginning. Charlotte Beaumont's Lexus RX coasted to a stop at the edge of our property like a predator circling its prey. She stepped out, her heels clicking against the gravel, an expensive suit, and perfect hair, giving her the look of someone who thought she could buy anything or anyone. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice sweet but sharp, like a knife hidden under velvet. "I'm Charlotte Beaumont, president of the Pine Valley HOA. We need to discuss your property." Grandpa Frank didn't flinch. At 78, his movements were still precise, his eyes always alert like a soldier who'd been through hell and back. He nodded, polite as ever. "Ma'am." She flashed a smile, but it never reached her eyes. "This junkyard of yours. It's out of place. It's bringing down property values." Frank's jaw tightened, but his voice never wavered. "It's been here for 40 years. Nothing's changed." Her smile faded, replaced by cold determination. "Times change, and so must your business. We're prepared to offer you a generous sum to buy your land. But if you're difficult..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Tommy Rodriguez, the muscle, stepped out of the Lexus, cracking his knuckles like he was ready for a fight. Charlotte's threats hung in the air, but Frank stood tall, calm, unwavering. He wasn't intimidated by her money, her power, or her threats. The game was on, and she didn't even know it yet. It started with small things. Notes slipped under the door, each one more condescending than the last. "Please address property boundaries immediately. Your salvage yard is a potential hazard to community safety." They were the kind of messages that seemed harmless at first, but I could feel the pressure building. Charlotte had an agenda, and it wasn't just about property lines. It was about control. One morning I found a new violation notice taped to the shed door. "Failure to comply will result in heavy fines and potential legal action." It wasn't even signed, just a generic threat from the HOA. I showed it to Grandpa, expecting him to react. Instead, he just shook his head. "They think they can scare me with that garbage," he muttered. He didn't even bat an eye when I told him I'd caught Tommy Rodriguez, Charlotte's enforcer, taking photos of the yard from the street. I wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or impressed. Tommy had parked his black SUV at the end of our property, snapping pictures with that smug smirk of his. Frank didn't say anything about it. He just went about his day, fixing up the junkyard like nothing was happening. But I saw the way he clenched his fists. Whenever he walked past the photos, Charlotte had sent him each one more threatening than the last. It was clear she wanted him gone. Things escalated quickly after that. One day Tommy showed up in person. I was standing by the fence, watching the sunset, when he parked his SUV just across the line. He got out and started walking toward the shed, his boots crunching on the gravel with every step. "Hey, what's going on here?" I asked, standing my ground. Tommy didn't answer at first. He just pulled out his phone and snapped a few more pictures of the shed, the property line, then turned the camera toward me like he was trying to catch me doing something wrong. "You got a problem, Rodriguez?" I asked, my voice rising. He gave me that smug look again, the same one I'd seen when he'd thrown a threat or two my way. "Just documenting the situation, man. Nothing personal." It wasn't until I noticed the small, discreet GPS tracker under my truck that I realized this wasn't just intimidation anymore. It was surveillance. Charlotte had crossed the line, making it personal. I could feel my blood pressure rising as I pulled it off and threw it to the ground. "You think you can just park here and keep taking pictures?" I shouted. Tommy didn't respond. He simply walked away back to his car with a look of dismissal in his eyes. He didn't even care enough to apologize or explain. He knew what he was doing. It was a game to him. I went inside to show Grandpa what I found, but he was already in the shed, picking through old tools with the same methodical calm he always had. He didn't say anything about it, but I knew it was eating at him. The harassment was one thing, but the blatant invasion of privacy was another. The real damage came a few days later. It wasn't the truck or the photos. It wasn't even the threats. No, it was when I walked outside and found the tires on Grandpa's old pickup slashed. 4 of them, just like that. I froze for a moment, staring at the mess in front of me. The rubber had been shredded to the point where the truck wasn't going anywhere. "Frank," I called out, my voice thick with anger. "Frank, come here." Grandpa slowly made his way out from the shed, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw the truck, he didn't react immediately. He just stood there, taking in the damage. I wanted him to shout to do something, but he didn't. Instead, he walked over to the truck and knelt down, inspecting the damage as if it were just another problem to solve. "Whoever did this will pay," he said quietly, his voice steady. I thought he was going to pull out a wrench or a tool to start fixing the tires, but he didn't. He just stood up and walked inside the house without saying another word. I had no idea what was going through his head, but I knew something was coming. It wasn't long before the authorities showed up. Charlotte, of course, had called in a complaint, one that claimed we were obstructing the progress of a community development project and violating city code. She'd made sure to keep her voice smooth, convincing the local sheriff's office that we were causing a public nuisance. I opened the door to find Officer Hayes standing on the porch, clipboard in hand, looking uncomfortable. "I'm just here to give you a heads up," he said, his tone neutral but apologetic. "Charlotte Beaumont filed a complaint. They're sending someone to inspect the property tomorrow. She's pressing for violations." I could hear the familiar rumble of Charlotte's Lexus RX in the distance, and I knew she was watching from somewhere, probably just waiting for us to cave. "She's been harassing us for weeks," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Officer Hayes nodded. "I know. I can't do much about the HOA stuff, but you have to be careful. If she's got the city backing her..." He trailed off, knowing it was a losing battle. "Don't worry, officer. We've got it covered," I said, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't just the tires or the complaints anymore. This was becoming a full-on war, and Charlotte wasn't playing by any rules. Then it happened. The breaking point. Tommy parked his SUV on the property line for the 6th day in a row. He was watching us again, taking more pictures, and this time he was making notes on his phone like he was preparing a legal case. I noticed the Lexus RX parked behind him, half hidden by the trees. Charlotte had arrived. She was watching us too, her presence suffocating. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, staring out at the property, trying to figure out what we could do. I knew Grandpa was playing a long game, waiting for Charlotte to slip up, but I wasn't patient. I wanted action now. At that moment, I realized we had everything we needed. Charlotte had made a critical mistake. Her SUV had been abandoned on our land for more than 72 hours. By law, that meant it was ours. We had the right to claim it. I stood up, walking into the house to find Grandpa sitting at the table, his head down, carefully going over a stack of papers. "You've been waiting for this moment, haven't you?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Patience, son, patience." I smiled, realizing then that the real war wasn't about the property, it was about outsmarting Charlotte at her own game. The convoy rolled up the gravel driveway like an approaching storm. EPA trucks, city inspection vans, black sedans, each vehicle marked with official plates. Charlotte's Lexus RX brought up the rear, her smug smile, a cold indication that she thought this was the final act in her game. Frank and I stood on the porch. I could feel the tension crackling, but Frank stayed calm, sipping his coffee like he had all the time in the world. Charlotte didn't even look at me as she strutted up to Frank, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "Mr. Carter, I trust you've had a chance to reconsider my offer." Frank didn't flinch. At 78, he was still a rock. "No, ma'am." She flashed a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then I'm afraid you're making a mistake. We have the paperwork to proceed with eminent domain." She wasn't even trying to hide her threats anymore. Tommy Rodriguez, the enforcer, stepped out of her SUV arms, crossed silently watching. I could see his usual arrogance slipping as the scene played out. He wasn't as certain as he used to be. Frank's voice was steady. "You've been trying to buy my land for months. Now you're trying to take it by force. It's not going to happen." Charlotte's eyes narrowed, but before she could escalate, I stepped forward. "Enough of your threats, Charlotte. We've got something you need to see." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folder, thick, heavy, full of everything Charlotte had been hiding. The emails, the bribery records, the shady transactions, all of it neatly documented. "What's this?" Charlotte snapped, her eyes flicking from the papers to me, then back to Frank. I placed the folder in front of her, my heart pounding but steady. "This is the evidence you've been trying to bury. Bribes to city officials, fake violations, corruption at every level." Charlotte's eyes flicked to the documents, her smile faltering. The cold confidence melted away. She didn't want to look at it, but she couldn't avoid it. "Those are private," she stammered, but the lie didn't stick. Her voice wavered. "You can't prove any of this." I smirked. "You made it easy. Your emails, your financial records, I've got it all. Your empire is built on lies, Charlotte, and it's crumbling now." I watched her face change from deflection to panic. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, her voice low, threatening. "I own this town." Frank's gaze was unflinching. "Not anymore." Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, cutting through Charlotte's words. Her smirk turned into a look of confusion and fear as federal agents, city officers, and environmental specialists flooded the driveway. Special Agent Rebecca Morrison, no relation to Frank, stepped forward, her badge gleaming in the sunlight. "Charlotte Beaumont," she said, her voice crisp and authoritative. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, fraud, and extortion." Charlotte's face went ashen. "What? No, this is a mistake." Frank remained calm as ever. "You thought you could use money and connections to run this town, but you didn't realize that some things can't be bought." Agent Morrison approached Charlotte, handcuffs at the ready. "You're going to have a lot of explaining to do. We've got everything we need. You're done." Charlotte flinched her eyes, scanning the crowd looking for some escape. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue. I have connections." Frank stepped closer, his voice calm. "You lost the moment you decided to mess with my family. Time to face the consequences." The arrest was swift, but the damage was done. Charlotte was led away, her face a mixture of disbelief and rage. Tommy Rodriguez, who had been standing behind her, stared at the ground, conflicted. I saw him glance at Frank, his gaze softer, almost apologetic. "I guess it's over," I said, more to myself than anyone. Frank's response was simple. "No, it's just beginning." The day after Charlotte's arrest, Pine Valley Estates felt different. The air, once thick with tension, now seemed to clear, replaced with a feeling of release. Neighbors who had always kept to themselves, too afraid to speak up, now gathered in small groups on their front lawns, sharing stories and talking openly. It wasn't just that Charlotte was gone, it was that, for the first time in years, they felt free to stand together. The weight of her tyranny had lifted, and the people of Pine Valley Estates realized they weren't powerless anymore. Frank stood silently on the porch, watching as Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor, walked over with a basket of homemade bread. Her voice was filled with gratitude as she handed it to him. "You did it, Frank. I never thought I'd see the day when we could finally be rid of her." Frank took the bread with a quiet nod, a small smile touching his lips. He didn't need words. His actions had spoken louder than anything he could have said. More neighbors came by, all offering words of thanks, and it was clear that Frank wasn't just a hero to his family, but to the entire community. The respect that had once been reserved for Charlotte now belonged to Frank. The junkyard, once seen as an eyesore by many, had become the heart of Pine Valley Estates. And as Frank stood there, watching the neighbors reconnect, he knew he had not just defeated a bully, he had restored the dignity of a community. As the weeks passed, the legal consequences of Charlotte's actions became clear. The evidence we'd collected was irrefutable, and soon the entire web of corruption she had spun began to unravel. 3 city officials were arrested and charged with bribery, including the building inspector who had been involved in Charlotte's schemes. The corrupt HOA board was disbanded, and new elections were held, bringing in leaders who actually cared about the community's well-being. Charlotte, meanwhile, was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for conspiracy, bribery, and extortion. Her once glamorous life of luxury fell apart quickly. Her assets were seized, and the luxury resort she had been planning was abandoned. The investors who had supported her pulled out, some left with nothing. Her mansion, a symbol of her power, was foreclosed and sold at auction to pay restitution to her victims. The property value in Pine Valley Estates soared as Charlotte's grip on the town loosened completely. As for Frank, he had kept his land and he had earned the respect of everyone around him. The battle was over, but the lessons it taught would live on. The final piece of this story came 3 months later.